Hey, what's up, guys? My name is PJ, and today I'm going to talk about the F word. That probably was not the best intro, but I'm going to talk about forgiveness. Why do we want to forgive when we're on the spiritual path? So, if you've watched some of my videos before, I kind of talk about how my spiritual path is the Course in Miracles or A Course in Miracles. So, I followed that path, and in that path specifically, forgiveness is a word that is mentioned over and over and over again. So, as someone who's been on that path and has been studying that book for the past 3 and 4 years, but not just studying it, but more so wanting to implement it into my life and really bring it as a part of my day-to-day experience. So, if I read something in there, if it's suggesting something, I have been wanting to make sure I actually apply that in different situations in my life, in my day-to-day life that I encounter. And I think that's really what kind of separates someone who has just heard about or has read the Course in Miracles versus those that are actually willing to put what it suggests into practice. And one of the things that it suggests over and over and over again is that we have to forgive as children of God, as people on the spiritual path, as spiritual seekers. We have to forgive. And as you can imagine, so many of us have resistances towards that concept. Oh, do I really have to forgive that person? Do I really have to forgive the other political party? Do I really have to forgive my uh, grandmother or whatever, whatever it is, whatever unforgivenesses we have? Do I really have to forgive that coworker that irritates the heck out of me every single day? Do I really have to do these things? And for a while, I would say I wanted to outsmart God. I wanted to say, okay, like, let me keep these unforgivenesses while simultaneously I ascend up the ladder of consciousness, which I'll put here. I talk about this diagram in my videos a lot. This is called the map of the levels of consciousness by Dr. David R. Hawkins. And so I wanted to like trick God, say, okay, let me keep my unforgivenesses, but like put on a facade of, oh, I have forgiven that person. I'm totally over that. Trying to trick God and fool God, and having Him kind of help me ascend up this ladder of consciousness all the way up to enlightenment, while simultaneously holding on tightly to my unforgivenesses. And as someone, you may have read the Course in Miracles before and studied it, but even if you haven't, the topic of forgiveness is a very, very big topic in there. And the word forgiveness is a lot more loaded, I would say, in the Course in Miracles, than it is in just like common terminology. And so I'll try to explain a little bit about what forgiveness is and what it looks like within the Course in Miracles framework. And from there, we'll go into why do we even want to forgive? Because I think it's one thing to know what it is, and then it's another thing to actually understand the why behind why we do this. Because without the why, the motivation and the excitement and the willingness, the small willingness is not there to actually forgive. So forgiveness in the Course in Miracles is defined as, and this is based on my understanding, I feel like every year that goes on and I read this book, my understanding gets deeper and deeper and deeper. But my current understanding of the term forgiveness, based on the Course in Miracles, is that forgiveness is the act of giving up our illusions and basically what's hindering our perception from seeing someone clearly. And what is seeing them clearly? What is seeing them in the light of truth? It's seeing them as innocent, as pure, as loved, as holy, as God still created them, and as they are in their essence. In other words, it's seeing their spirit, not their form. Or basically forgiveness is removing all the barriers in our perception that are hindering us from seeing them as their essence, as their God-created version of themselves, versus seeing their form and seeing the personality, their ego. Basically, like I said, forgiveness is letting go of seeing them as an ego and instead seeing them as a spirit. And basically, forgiveness is an act of removing all the barriers that are getting in the way of us seeing them as God created them, as love, really, as because God is love. And in the Course in Miracles, it says God is love, and love only creates by extension, and only love creates. So love extends itself and extends into more love, creates more love. And so everything that love has created, and God has created us, so love has created us. So as an extension of love, we are love. In our truth, in our essence, in our spirit, we are love. And I know that's a very cheesy, woo-woo, thrown around term in the spiritual community of like, we are love and light. But really, A Course in Miracles is a path that I have found it's very deep and rooted, and it's not just like, oh, like love and light, but let me ignore all the things that piss me off about a certain individual, or all the unforgivenesses and all the hate and all the anger that I have in my heart. Let me just forget that, and not address that, while simultaneously just claim we're love and light. It's not about, the Course in Miracles doesn't play like that. It's like, no, you have to address these unforgivenesses. You have to look at the hate that you have for certain people, and then forgive them. And Jesus in the Bible on the cross, he says that, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I think the Course in Miracles doesn't say this, but I feel like based on my understanding, Course in Miracles would say it, or based on my Course in Miracles understanding, I would say, forgive them, for they not know who they are. They don't know their essence. But as someone who's on the spiritual path and learning more and more about truth of our identity, truth of who we are, you who are the spiritual seeker, you know who they are. So it's your job to forgive them their form, their ego, their personality, who they think they are, and see their truth. Because it's only through seeing their truth, seeing who they really are as God created them, seeing their spirit, their essence, it's only through doing that you see your own essence and your own truth. And basically, the Course in Miracles keeps talking about how all minds are joined. So it's not like you have your mind and it's separate, and then they have their mind, and so you can see them as guilty and awful and horrible, while simultaneously seeing yourself as love and light and innocence and purity and all those things. Both have to go together. Both have to ascend together. It's like a ship. Course in Miracles would call it a sonship. The sonship has to, if like the sonship was a spaceship or a ship, like Noah's Ark, it had to go all together. It had to ascend all together. You couldn't just ascend by yourself and quote unquote leave your brothers, or like not like see yourself as holier than them. All true spiritual ascended masters, spiritual teachers, Jesus, who is my spiritual teacher, I would say, the ascended master that I look up to the most and draw lessons from the most. He obviously, based on what the stories that are in the Bible about him, he hung out with the people that other people call sinful, other people call dirty. No, you don't hang out with the prostitutes. No, you do not hang out with the tax collectors. Those are the gross. Ooh, we don't talk to those people. We don't hang out with those people. We don't even touch those people. But time and time again, Jesus hung out with the deplorables. He hung out with the people that nobody else even acknowledges human. Why? Because he saw essence. So he didn't say, okay, I'm going to ascend to the highest levels of spiritual realization possible, and then completely ignore and neglect the people who are not my level, who are not enlightened. So as we ascend, we ascend together. There's an element of oneness. We can't just like climb the ladder by ourselves and then completely neglect others in our perception, into our realization. So forgiveness, I mean, who knows? I'm gonna just continuously learn more and more and more about this topic because it's so deep and so profound. And it literally in the Course in Miracles it says, forgiveness is my only function here. Literally, as a spiritual seeker, as a person who seeks enlightenment, who seeks awakening, who seeks to be the truest version of themselves, free of all illusions about themselves, forgiveness is my function. Literally, that's what we do. Certainly, as followers of the path of A Course in Miracles, but also as spiritual seekers, we forgive, meaning we constantly work on letting go of all of our illusions, all of the barriers that are covering our true seeing and our true perception and knowledge and sight from seeing the reality, seeing the truth beyond the illusions. Because we have a lot of barriers, we have a lot of illusions and falsehoods in place and perceptual barriers that hinder us from seeing someone's truth. Now, someone may have indeed committed horrendous acts, and does forgiveness say, okay, let's just ignore, their love and let's see their essence, their love and light, their spirit in their true essence, and completely neglect, what they have done? No, it's not like we completely. On one level, on one perception, from a really high level, you say yes, because who committed those acts is not the truest version of that person. It's almost like we are all actors on this earth plane, and it's like spirit, pure spirit, manifests in these earth suits, in these earth bodies, and it starts acting just like an actor would go on set, and this actor is somebody else, right? Like the actor is Mel Gibson. And then Mel Gibson goes and plays the role of Braveheart. And so he's playing a role. So whether we like the character they play in that role, whether we love it or hate it, that doesn't change who Mel Gibson is, because he's just playing a character. He's just acting out a script, a play. And it's not who he really is. And it's literally like the same way. Hopefully that metaphor was kind of clear, because in my mind, the way I see it is like we're all, our egos, even the most horrendous person that has committed horrible acts, they're still playing the character of that murderer, of that convicted felon, of that evil person. They're still playing that out, but they're so distant and far off from the realization of their truth and their essence, that they're so disconnected from truth and their reality as who God created them. And oftentimes trauma has played a massive part in that person seeing themselves that way, being so far from purity and love and truth and essence, that they have committed those acts. But as a spiritual seeker, it's not that we condone those acts. Wrong, what's not supportive of life is not supportive of life, and it's not good, and it's not helpful. And if somebody is intentionally hurting other people, we have to stand up against that, because that's not loving to other people, clearly, but it's not also loving to themselves and to their essence. And with each act of unlovingness, they're getting themselves further and further and deeper into the illusion of who they think they are versus their essence. So they're literally distancing themselves from their essence. And this earth plane, at the end of the day, is like a school playground, and it gives us all these opportunities to act out these karmic lessons. So somebody's karmic lesson in this life may have to be the perpetrator. And it's like they have to act these things out. So everyone's on a different journey, and when we forgive doesn't mean we become oblivious of the wrong actions that someone has committed. So forgiveness is not like, oh, this person has killed like 10 people and then I'm going to forgive them um, and act like that never happened. No, it happened, but forgiveness as a spiritual seeker, you forgive while meaning that you remove the barriers in your sight, including the actions that they committed, and you see them for who they really are, their essence. Um, and you know, like people say dogs and cats also, like they love unconditionally. And so even if someone is a convicted felon, you know, they've committed murders or whatever, even that person is loved unconditionally by their dog. And that dog literally has that, the power of unconditional love is such that that unconditional love and seeing, you know, that dog sees that person for beyond their ego and their actions that they've committed. They see them for their essence and they love that essence. And by the process of seeing them as their essence, they bring the best out of that individual. Like that's why dogs are sometimes found in healing treatment centers and prisons, because the unconditional love of that dog can literally transform someone from inside out, because it reminds them of their essence, of their spirit, of the truth of who they are. Um, this topic is tough to talk about and it's tough to explain. As one of my favorite spiritual teachers of all time, David R. Hawkins always says, it's like these realities, this reality of unconditional love, this reality of peace, these are experiential realities. And to be able and to try to conceptualize them it's very difficult, and might even reach the level of impossible, because it's like I've said this metaphor before in some of my other videos, where you can explain to the best of your ability what honey is to someone, but until they have experiential experience of eating honey, they're not gonna understand fully what honey is, and what it tastes like. So the reality of experiencing one's essence, experiencing one's spirit, experiencing one's truth, is a very experiential reality. Um, Experiencing oneself as innocent, as pure, as loved, as unconditionally loved, as limitless, as changeless, as God created us. That is an experiential reality that I have only been able to really tap into through forgiveness, meditation, prayer. I mean, those are the three gateways to that spiritual reality, to that experiential spiritual reality. And another thing that A Course in Miracles talks about a lot, and I'm sure you know this and have heard this if you're a spiritual, if you're a student of the Course in Miracles, it says that a universal theology is not what we need. We need a universal experience of spiritual reality. Because once we've had that experience, one time of having that experience, that spiritual experience, we are changed from inside out. We are not the person who we were before we just had that experience. So we just had an experience of seeing beyond the veil. And the illusions that cover our perception were removed. Even for an instant, we just saw the truth. It's like, for an instant, we were unplugged from the matrix and we just saw Zion, the reality. That one instant is enough to change someone forever, because you can return to the matrix, quote unquote, but you now know that there's a reality beyond this created reality, this illusion reality, this matrix, this false perception. So forgiveness, it's funny because when I was trying to start this video, I was telling myself, don't talk about what forgiveness is, because it can get so complicated, and honestly it's hard for me to put it in words. My goal was to talk more about the why behind forgiveness, but I feel like it's hard to just talk about the why without trying to also understand the what of forgiveness, especially as Course in Miracles defines it. But I'll just say this. I believe how we deal with issues on a societal level is different than how we live or deal with them on a personal, experiential, spiritual level. So on a societal level, the right thing might be to put someone in jail that's a serial murderer. And on a personal, individual level, the right thing may be to exercise forgiveness and in your heart see that person's essence, while still like not it's not like, oh, you just deny that they did that. No, like you know what they did, but you still see their essence. So in your personal life, you practice forgiveness, but on a societal level, so what we do on a society level versus what we do in our own spiritual practice and individual experience could be absolutely different, and most often must be different for things to work. So this is our spiritual practice is in us. So it's like it's our own experiential experience, and and you know, they're just separate realities in a lot of ways, you know. And so what we have to do on a societal level might be different than what we have to do on a personal level if we want to ascend. If you don't want to ascend this ladder, then fine, you can go on without forgiving anybody. But if your goal is to spiritually ascend, is to spiritually evolve, is to unleash the fullest expression of yourself in this lifetime, then forgiveness is a must. So let's move into why we want to forgive. So this was a good segue right here as to talking about if you want to go from below 200 to above 200 and constantly ascend from there and, you know, onwards into joy or peace, joy, enlightenment, those levels, we have to forgive, because we can't hold judgment and attack and hatred in our heart towards somebody else while simultaneously ascending to higher and higher levels of consciousness, because those things that we hold in our heart, that hatred, that anger, that envy, that jealousy, that resentment, that bitterness, those grievances, those things are weighing us down. And the spiritual ascension, moving up the ladder of consciousness, ascending to higher and higher levels of consciousness, is an act of letting go. It's a releasing of these things that are holding us down, all the things that I just mentioned. And oftentimes, David R. Hawkins would say, we get a juice. Our ego gets a satisfaction from holding on to certain resentments, to certain angers, bitternesses, grievances. It's like somebody did something to us and we refuse, hardcore. We refuse, like we just will not let this resentment go. We would not let this grievance go. We hold on to it for dear life, and we're basically, like what David Hawkins says, it's like reducing this experience, this resentment. And we might juice that experience for like 20, 30, 40 years. Some people hold on to grievances for their whole life. And that, I was listening to David Hawkins' program, and he was saying, like, playing the victim is almost as satisfying as being enlightened. Like, he was saying the ego juice that you get from being the victim and playing the victim card of like, oh, they did this to me. And yes, people may have actually done things to us and hurt us and victimize us and done stuff to us that we were the clear victim in that situation. But holding onto that in our consciousness, how is that serving us? If we are committed to our spiritual ascension, to our spiritual evolution, can we keep moving forward and higher and higher and higher and still keep those things in our baggage, in our consciousness? Can we do both? Can we ascend and hold on to those grievances? Yes, you can ascend to a certain level, but up a certain level you can't go. That's where forgiveness is like what you need to move higher and higher on this ladder. And as long as you're holding on to certain grievances and juicing the experience and milking it for all the ego satisfaction and gratification that it can give you, David Hawkins says it's like our ego gets such a juice from being the victim. It gets such a juice from holding on to resentments, because as long as it plays the victim, the ego keeps getting sympathy from other people. It's so self-centered. It's like, for example, if I play the victim and I come here and say, guys, like, this person did this to me and I'm such a victim. And then let's say I get all these comments like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You went through that. Like, I like constantly get these comments, this validation, this, oh my God, like all this attention. The ego thrives off of that attention. So the ego will juice this experience of victimhood as long as it can, and take it as far as it can, because the satisfaction that it gets is just so high. It's like a drug. Like, victimhood is like a drug, and holding on to resentments is like a drug. Holding on to these bitternesses is like a drug, and I've seen people firsthand create their whole identity for 20, 30 years in their life based on a certain resentment, based on a certain victim narrative in their mind, and who they are has been shaped. Their whole identity, their whole ego structure now has been shaped around that resentment. So you can imagine the level of resistance that would be in place towards forgiveness. Because if you forgive that thing, that event, and you let go of your illusions about it, if you let go of the juice, the payoff that you get from that resentment, that anger, that hatred towards someone, if you let go of that, if you forgive that, you let go of your illusions, you see their essence, then your whole personality structure that has been built around that grievance, around that hatred, is going to fall apart. And it would be an ego death. It would literally feel like death, because the ego, who you've known yourself to be, is dying. But when the ego dies, when illusions fall, which is why we forgive in the first place, it's a fall of illusions. Dr. Hawkins always says, when illusions are like clouds, and when the clouds are removed, the sun shines on its own. We don't have to make the sun shine. The sun will shine the moment the curtain is open, the moment when the blinds are lifted up, when the clouds are removed. The sun will shine on its own. We don't have to make it, because that's what the sun does. That's what the truth does. The truth shines on its own when illusions, the barriers that are in the way, are removed. And that's what forgiveness does. And the Course in Miracles also says, like, it's not our job to create love. That would be saying like, it's not our job to create sunlight. The sunlight already is. Our job as a student of A Course in Miracles, our job as a spiritual aspirant, is to remove the obstacles, the barriers that are in front of that sunlight, in front of that love. And I think, like, the actual line in A Course in Miracles is like, it's not our job to create love, but it's to remove the barriers that are holding the existence of love out of our awareness. Something like that. I'm sure I butchered that phrase a little bit, but the meaning is exactly that. It's our job with forgiveness is to remove the barriers that are covering up truth, covering up love. And as we are holding these things up in place, like I said, Course in Miracles has this really good metaphor where it says, like, if you hold someone a prisoner to your anger, prisoner to your resentment, prisoner to your unforgiveness against them, the hatred you have against them, if you hold them prisoner and then you think you're free, but you're actually guarding them, you have to now stand guard at the door of the prison to make sure they don't escape, or somebody doesn't help them escape, you're imprisoned with them as equally. So who you're holding in prison with your anger, with your hostility, with your resentments towards them, you're also holding yourself in prison. So you can't have one without the other. So without forgiveness for others, you can't be free yourself. So we forgive others, we let go of our illusions towards them, because that also frees us. Who we free liberates us. That's why the Course in Miracles also keeps talking about how our brother or our enemy, who we are holding all this resentment towards, all this anger, all these grievances towards, they become our savior when we forgive them. When we forgive them and see them in the clear light of truth, see them for their essence, who they really are, who God created them as, we also see ourselves as that. Because as long as we're keeping themselves in that illusion or perceptual illusion and prison, we're also holding ourselves there as their prison guard. And so why we forgive is because forgiveness frees us. Forgiveness, which is the removal of our illusions that are holding the light of essence in that person. We don't see it in them. We're milking the experience of resentment, of anger, of bitterness for so long and refuse to forgive because we get this payoff, this ego payoff. When we let go of that with forgiveness, we ascend up this ladder of consciousness and move higher and higher into higher levels of being, which being higher on this level, on this ladder, has its own satisfaction. It has its own fulfillment, and the experience itself becomes self-rewarding. And the experience of forgiveness and the freedom that we feel from forgiveness, that we experience from forgiving, that becomes its own joy and its own reward and its own motivator for us to do that more and more and more, because it's so gratifying to keep feeling liberated, to let go of these resentments, to let go of these bitternesses that we have held against people for so long. And I always end up shooting videos related to matters and topics that I'm going through in my own life, especially like at the time of the shooting of the video. So in a sense, the videos are like timestamps for where I have been in my own journey when I've shot them. And so one thing that I've recently been really coming across and learning more about forgiveness is that our ego loves stories, and it loves stories especially that have it portrayed as the victim. It loves it. It thrives off of it. And as long as it's the victim, it literally is getting strengthened. The ego is getting strengthened because the soul, the spirit, is never victimized. Even if the body is imprisoned, even if the body is tortured, and even if the body is abused, the spirit is always free. The truth of this spirit is that it's always free. Nothing can imprison our soul, our spirit, that aspect of us that God created us as. So the ego keeps getting stronger when it plays the victim because it keeps making you feel like you are it. It makes you feel like you are the ego. It keeps making you feel like you are the victim, the personality. And so as long as it keeps playing that victim card, it keeps thriving. You're literally giving it more and more energy and investing it with more truth. It's not the truth. Our ego, our personality structure, it's not our truth. Our truth is our spirit, our essence, that forgiveness helps us see. And forgiveness also helps us see that in other people. But the ego keeps getting stronger when we hold on to these things. So what I was saying is, like, in my own experience, I've noticed that certain situations may have happened in my life and made me play the victim card. And I've done the internal work, or at least I thought, I did, and I'd forgiven that person. I let go of my own illusions against that person. I gave up all the barriers that are holding their light to be seen by me. Basically, like letting go of my own negativity towards them and seeing their essence, regardless of what they may have done, seeing their light, even if they've truly done something that was wrong, that was hurtful, still being able to see them beyond my own grievances against them, seeing them in their light, because only through doing that, I will see my own light. So I've had experiences where I thought I've forgiven someone, and recently, And then all of a sudden I hear from them, and then this feeling gets brought back up in me where I'm like, oh wow, like I'm still uh like it's like a habitual response of falling back into the victim the moment they even appear in my consciousness. And so I had to be very mindful of that and be very aware, oh wow, like look at the ego wanting to still play the victim card with this situation with this person, because the satisfaction that it gets from that versus, at the end of the day, it's like, do I want to satisfy my ego or do I want to satisfy my spirit? Because my spirit will be satisfied by forgiveness, and the last thing that my ego will be satisfied by is forgiveness. So which one of these do I want to satisfy? And for me, and if you're on the spiritual path and we want to ascend, we want to satisfy our spirit. And what pleases our spirit is forgiveness, is letting go of our illusions. It's stopping feeding the ego. And like I said, the ego is fed by victim narratives, especially. So I had to see that I still have that tendency to want to play that card. But I also had to remind myself that there's nothing that this ego payoff will bring me that I actually want, in my truth, that I actually want. It brings no, yes, it might bring like some sort of weird ego high, ego satisfaction, but it doesn't really bring true payoffs, true fulfillment, true joy. And at the end of the day, we forgive because we want peace. We want joy in our lives. We want true fulfillment in our hearts. And as long as we have these unforgivenesses, we can't ascend up this ladder, especially up to joy, up to peace, up to love. We can't go there with unforgivenesses in our hearts. So we forgive to free ourselves, while simultaneously we are freeing the person who we are holding these things against, these anger and hostilities against. So things may come up, and I think in 2020 and 2021, which is when I'm shooting this video, things are going to get brought up within us even more and more and more. So we're going to have triggers that happen, unforgivenesses that get brought up to the surface. And one of my my favorite spiritual teachers on YouTube, his name is Victor Odo, and he keeps talking about how like these blocks, these things that we think we thought we dealt with, but like we realize we haven't, they're like bubbles that are coming up to the surface. These triggers are like bubbles that are coming up to the surface. And before then, that surface was like undisturbed. There was nothing on the surface of that water. And then boom, there's a bubble. And these bubbles are like, oh, I didn't think there's anything there. That bubble is bubbling up to the surface because it like requires our attention. So these things bubble up to the surface, and if you're a student of Course in Miracles, you look at that unforgiveness that's still there, that resentment that's still there, and you forgive it again. And you forgive it again. You let that illusion go again, and in the Bible, somebody asks, I think it's like Peter asking Jesus, "Hey Jesus, like how many times do I have to forgive?" And Jesus is like 70 times 7, a minute or something like that, or an hour. Or a week. I don't know exactly how many exactly, but I know it was like 70 times 7. 70 times 7 or 77 times 7, regardless of the exact amount, it's basically limitless. Like you have to constantly forgive. So even if you thought you dealt with something and it gets brought back up, that's a sign that that's still there. That's still bubbling up to the surface. So that's still there. So forgive it again. Forgive it again. Because you have to know, you have to be cognizant of this, and you have to be aware that the joy and the fulfillment that comes from forgiveness, it's worth it. I know to the ego, it never seems like it's worth it. The ego never seems like, to the ego, it never seems like forgiveness is a good idea. Because obviously the ego feeds off of not forgiving, of playing the victim, of hating. So when we forgive, we know we're like making the ego be malnourished, but we have to be aware that it's worth it with our spirit, with our spiritual evolution. And one of the whys behind forgiveness is that if your why and your desire is to ascend up this ladder, then forgiveness is a crucial part of that, and you can't ascend without forgiveness. You can't move up without forgiveness. So when your why in life is to ascend spiritually and up the ladder of consciousness, so like you're using this lifetime that God has given you, this re-emergence into the world of form and playing this karmic game of life. If your goal within this lifetime is to ascend higher up the ladder, then you have to know that forgiveness is always worth it. It's like my boss at the company I work for, he used to always say, until you say yes to something bigger, you're not going to be able to say yes to the smaller things. So the way you say no to the small, like the things that are not worth it, is by saying yes to something bigger. So when you say yes to your own enlightenment, it becomes very easy to also say yes to forgiveness and no to the ego. So when you have that priority in place, when your priority is ascension, when your priority is spiritual evolution and awakening, then that makes forgiveness also a priority, and it makes it worth it, because otherwise the ego will always try to convince you that forgiveness is never worth it. Giving up your illusions about somebody is never worth it. Letting go of all the barriers that are perceptually in place, all the barriers that are blocking your perception from seeing their truth, seeing their essence, seeing them as their child of God version. The ego is going to try to constantly convince you that that's not worth it. Removing those barriers are not worth it, and keeping on to the resentments is what's worth it. Keeping on to the victim narrative is what's worth it. But you've got to be willing, and you've got to have faith and know that it's worth it to let go of those things. And there's no payoff that those things can give you, those grievances can give you, that your spirit will not double, triple, quadruple, 10 times, 100x that, the fulfillment that your spirit will give you. It's like this. Let's say you're a business owner and you want to sell your business, and in your mind, somebody comes up to you. Let's say your business is actually worth $10 million, but you don't know that. You're not aware of its true worth. And some sleazy person that's trying to con you into a bad deal comes up to you and it's like, hey, I give you $100,000. Now keep in mind your business is actually worth $10 million. And they make it feel like that's a really good deal, like you're getting a really good bargain. You should totally take up this offer and sell them your business for $100,000, even though it's worth way more than that. The ego is like that con man. It's like that con artist, that sleazy salesperson that's trying to convince you that that's a good deal. But you have to have faith and the courage and the willingness to say, no, thank you for the offer. I'm going to hold off because I believe that there's more in store. I believe that there's more of a payoff, more of a value that I actually can get. And spirit swoops in, not only gives you $10 million for your business, it gives you $10 billion. That's how the spirit works. The spirit just gives you way more than you ever could expect. So trusting the spirit, having faith in God and God's grace and the power of forgiveness and the gift of forgiveness that you're not only giving to yourself, but you're giving to the other person, that's worth it. You have to have that faith, that courage, that willingness to forgive, and just have the knowingness that it's always worth it. Even though at the time, it definitely doesn't seem like that. So I just wanted to make this video because not only is this a relevant thing in my own life, especially with the political climate, that was really one of the big things that kind of brought this into my awareness, where I was like, oh, I really need to amp up my forgiveness game, because no matter what side of the aisle you are, the political aisle you are in the US, especially right now, the other side it's like so satisfying to hate the other side, no matter what side you are on. And that's the game of duality, and the duality is always the game of ego. And it doesn't mean when you forgive that you don't still take side, but you don't have the ego payoff anymore of hating the other side. So you can say, yeah, I stand on the right or I stand on the left, but I'm not gonna hate the other side because I don't want the payoff of that. Now, doesn't mean when you forgive your preferences go out the window. You don't. All those things are still there. So it's not like you lose your mind and just become like completely. Everything just becomes like oneness. And in your experience, everything becomes oneness because you don't have that separation mentality in place anymore, that duality in place anymore, and you're moving more and more towards unity, towards 5D, what people call in New Age spirituality, or like the New Earth, as people call it in Christianity, and also like New Age spirituality called New Earth. But you're moving more towards unity consciousness with forgiveness. So in your experience, yes, things are becoming more one, but you still, take sides. You still do that, but you don't hate the other side. That's the difference. That's what forgiveness enables you to do. So, as I was saying earlier, I always make my videos based on what's been relevant in my life, and I noticed that my ego loves hating the other side, and has been doing it for a few months now. More than I'm almost getting close to a year, and has been doing that. And I was like, okay, do I want my ego to be paid or do I want my spirit to be paid? Which one is my highest priority? And so I got my priorities straight again and was like, you know what? I'm gonna make a video about the topic of forgiveness because I was looking online on YouTube trying to find some videos about it, especially forgiveness as explained in A Course in Miracles, and there were some great videos. But I just felt like I probably can add a new perspective and a unique viewpoint in this video that I haven't seen expressed much. So I tried to do that. So, but I just want to add to the conversation online about the concept of forgiveness and its role in our spiritual evolution. So I hope that I did that. I know that I kind of went all over the place a little bit in this video because when a topic is so fresh on my mind and it's so relevant in my experience, I get so amped up and in a sense I'm like, guys, let me tell you all the stuff I've been learning about this and like realizing about this. Let me share that all with you. So I get like a little boy excited and tend to like go all over the place. So even with that, I hope that this video was helpful for you. I hope that I was able to give you the encouragement, that little boost that you may have needed to give forgiveness a chance, to give forgiveness a try, because forgiveness is the key to your spiritual advancement, and your spiritual advancement is the pathway to joy and happiness and fulfillment and peace. So that's what I want. That's what I want for you guys, for my listeners, for my viewers. So I was like, how am I gonna want that for you without talking about forgiveness? So anyways, I hope this video was helpful. If you liked it, please like this video. That's how you can let me know what kind of topics resonate with you the most so I can make more videos on those topics. And if you liked the content in this video and want to see more videos related to stuff like this, please subscribe to my channel so my videos can appear on your timeline and on your feed. And again, most importantly, I appreciate you for giving me your attention and your time. And it was truly an honor to spend this, I think this is about an hour now, this hour with you. So thank you, and I hope to see you guys back on my channel soon. Talk soon. Bye.